polished marble floors of the downtown bank gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the crisp shoes and tailored suits of the executives who strode through its lobby. The air smelled faintly of leather, ink, and polished wood, wealth neatly packaged. Into this world stepped Emily Carter, clutching a slim binder of notes and a heart full of hope. She was only 29, but already she had spent years refining her idea, sketching business plans late at night, and dreaming of building something that could change lives. Today, she had an appointment with a loan officer who, she prayed, would believe in her vision. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her blazer. Nothing fancy, just a navy jacket she'd bought secondhand, but pressed carefully the night before. She had practiced her pitch a dozen times in the mirror, rehearsed every financial projection, memorized every answer to possible questions. This was her chance. The receptionist gave her a polite but distracted smile, then directed her to a glass-walled office at the far end of the lobby. Inside sat a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and an expensive tie. His nameplate read, Richard H. Calloway, Senior Loan Officer. "Miss Carter, is it?" he said, rising only halfway from his chair as she entered. His tone was cordial but distant, as if he had already measured her and found her lacking. "Yes, thank you for seeing me," Emily replied, forcing a smile. She set her binder on the table, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "I'm here to apply for a small business loan. I believe my company has the potential to scale rapidly, and I'd like to share my plan with you." Richard gestured for her to begin, leaning back in his chair with practiced detachment. Emily launched into her presentation. She spoke of her product, an innovative idea that combined technology and everyday convenience. She outlined her projections, her market research, the letters of interest from potential clients. Her passion filled the room, her voice gaining strength as she described the future she envisioned. When she finished, she looked up, eyes shining with determination. "I'm asking for $150,000. With that capital, I can launch production, hire a small team, and bring this idea to market within a year." Richard tapped his pen against his notepad, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible sigh. "Miss Carter," he said finally, "it's a spirited presentation. But I'm afraid this isn't the kind of venture we can support." Emily blinked. I don't understand. I've shown you the numbers. The potential market is huge. With just a small investment..." Richard raised a hand. "Numbers on paper are one thing. Execution is another. Frankly, you don't have the track record. No significant collateral, no prior businesses under your belt, no financial safety net. Banks like ours can't take risks on passion alone." Her cheeks flushed, but she sat straighter. Everyone starts somewhere. Steve Jobs started in a garage. Oprah was told she didn't belong on television. Why should my lack of privilege disqualify me from even the chance? The loan officer gave a thin smile, the kind people give when they think they're being patient. "Look, Miss Carter, you're young, you're enthusiastic, but enthusiasm doesn't pay back loans. My advice? Get a few more years of experience. Maybe start smaller. And, if you'll forgive my bluntness, try to find a male co-founder. Investors are more comfortable when there's stability at the helm." The words hit like a slap. Emily's throat tightened, but she refused to let tears show. She gathered her binder slowly, each movement deliberate. "So, what you're saying," she said quietly, "is that you don't believe in me. Not my idea, not my work. Not me." Richard didn't answer directly. He only stood, extending his hand with a perfunctory politeness. "Thank you for coming in. I wish you the best of luck." Emily shook his hand briefly, her grip firm, despite the anger boiling inside. Then she walked out of the glass office, past the polished floors, past the indifferent receptionist, past the gleaming doors that seemed to mock her. Outside, the city roared with life. Cars honking, people rushing, skyscrapers gleaming. Emily stopped on the sidewalk, her binder pressed to her chest. The rejection echoed in her mind, each word a dagger. No collateral, no experience. find a man. For a moment, she wanted to crumble, to believe them, to accept that maybe her dream was too big, too foolish, too impossible. But then another voice rose within her, stubborn, defiant, fiery. They don't believe in you? Fine, you'll show them. You'll show all of them. Emily lifted her chin, her jaw set. If the bank wouldn't give her money, she would find another way. She would build her dream brick by brick, dollar by dollar, with nothing but grit and vision. And one day, she would walk back through those same doors, not as a desperate applicant, but as someone they could never dismiss again. The seed of determination had been planted, and though she didn't know it yet, that seed would grow into a billion-dollar company. Long before she sat in that glass-walled office, Emily Carter carried a dream inside her, a flame that flickered even in the darkest of times. She had grown up in a small Midwestern town, where opportunity rarely knocked and ambition was often treated with suspicion. Her father worked long hours as a mechanic, his hands permanently stained with grease. Her mother cleaned houses, rising before dawn and returning home exhausted, yet still managing to tuck Emily into bed with whispered encouragement. "Don't settle for less, Em. You're meant for something bigger." Money was scarce. Emily's shoes were always a season behind fashion, her backpack held together with duct tape. But her mind? It was endless. She devoured library books about inventors, entrepreneurs, and visionaries. While her classmates doodled flowers in their notebooks, Emily drew diagrams, products that didn't exist yet, logos for imaginary companies, slogans scribbled in the margins. At 13, she started her first business. With nothing but an old sewing machine borrowed from a neighbor, Emily made tote bags out of discarded fabric. She sold them at school for $5 each. Most kids bought them not because they needed them, but because Emily's energy was contagious. She believed so fiercely in what she made that others believed too. By high school, she was running bake sales, fundraising drives, even a small tutoring service. But it wasn't about the money, not really. It was about proving to herself that she could create something from nothing. Each dollar earned was a reminder. I can build. I can dream. I can make this real. Her teachers saw her potential. One business studies teacher, Mrs. Green, pulled her aside after class one day. "Emily, you've got the spark. Don't let anyone tell you it's too much. The world needs women like you." Women who dare those words etched themselves into Emily's memory. College was another battlefield. She earned scholarships, worked late-night shifts at diners, cleaned dorms on weekends, anything to cover tuition. Her classmates came from wealthy families, armed with connections and safety nets. Emily arrived with nothing but determination. Yet even when she felt out of place, she refused to shrink. In business school, she pitched bold ideas in classrooms where professors raised skeptical brows. Once, after presenting a project on a startup concept, a professor chuckled and said, "Ambitious, Miss Carter, but perhaps too ambitious." She smiled tightly, though inside she burned. Ambitious? Good. Too ambitious? Just watch me. During internships, she saw firsthand how corporations worked. The hierarchy, the politics, the way women were often overlooked in boardrooms. She took notes silently, not just about the businesses, but about the gaps, about the things that could be better, more humane, more daring. But the real turning point came one summer when she worked at a small tech startup run out of a cramped warehouse. There were no corner offices, no corporate suits, just a group of dreamers fueled by pizza and caffeine. Emily thrived in that environment. She brainstormed, coded, marketed, and even cleaned floors when needed. For the first time, she felt the pulse of possibility. This is what I want, she thought. Not a safe job, not a steady paycheck. I want to build something from scratch. I want to prove it can be done. Her idea began to take shape soon after. Late at night in her tiny apartment, Emily scribbled notes on sticky pads, covered her walls with sketches and timelines. She envisioned a company that blended technology with everyday convenience, a product that would save time, connect people, and disrupt an entire industry. She spoke of it to friends, most of whom nodded politely, but dismissed it as a fantasy. "Startups fail all the time, Em," they warned. "Why not get a stable job first? Pay off your loans, then maybe think about it." But Emily shook her head. Stable isn't the point. Impact is. Her parents worried too. Her mother asked gently, "Honey, wouldn't you feel safer with something steady? We don't want you struggling like we did." Emily kissed her mother's hand. "Mum, you struggled so I wouldn't have to play it safe. You told me to dream bigger. This is me dreaming." And so, by the time she walked into that bank years later, Emily had already carried this dream across half a lifetime. It wasn't just an idea. It was her identity, her promise to herself and to the people who had believed in her when she had nothing. That's why the rejection cut so deeply. It wasn't just about the money. It was about being told that her dream, her years of sacrifice, her fire, didn't matter. That she wasn't enough. But Emily Carter had never been the type to let doubt extinguish her flame. If anything, rejection was gasoline. And now, with her dream burning hotter than ever, she was ready to prove the world wrong. The day Emily walked out of the bank empty-handed, she made herself a silent promise. If no one would invest in her, she would invest in herself. But making that vow was easier than living it. Her apartment became both her sanctuary and her prison. A tiny one-bedroom walk-up with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, it hardly had enough space for a bed, a desk, and the second-hand laptop she had purchased with the last of her savings. The walls were bare, except for the hundreds of sticky notes and sketches she had plastered everywhere. Her war room. To raise money, Emily sold nearly everything she owned. Her television, her jewelry, even her beloved bicycle that had carried her across campus during her college years. Each item sold was a small heartbreak, but also a brick laid on the path to her dream. She picked up extra jobs to keep herself afloat. By day, she worked at a marketing agency as a junior assistant, crunching numbers and drafting reports. By night, she waited tables at a diner, pouring coffee for truck drivers and cleaning up after late-night regulars. On weekends, she tutored neighborhood kids in math and English. Her friends shook their heads. "Em, you're burning out," one warned. "This isn't sustainable." But Emily only smiled, tired but resolute. "It's not forever. It's just fuel." Every spare dollar went into her idea. She bought parts, software licenses, cheap supplies. She taught herself coding from free online courses, often staying up until dawn hunched over her laptop, her eyes stinging but her mind alight. When she hit roadblocks, she didn't quit. She found workarounds. The sacrifices piled up. She missed birthdays and reunions. Friends stopped inviting her out, assuming she'd be too busy. When she did show up, she was often distracted, her thoughts tethered to her prototype or her spreadsheets. Dating was nearly impossible. One boyfriend broke up with her after she cancelled 3 dinners in a row to finish a presentation. "You're married to this dream," he told her bitterly. "There's no room for anyone else." Emily cried that night, not just for the relationship, but for the growing loneliness. Still, she told herself, if success costs me comfort now, I'll pay it. I'll pay it all. Her parents worried constantly. Her father called one evening, his voice heavy. "Em, you're working yourself to death. Maybe it's time to settle for something stable." She listened quietly, then answered with the same calm conviction she always carried. "Dad, you taught me how to fix a car with nothing but duct tape and determination. This is my duct tape moment. I can't give up now." There were nights when doubt clawed at her. Nights when her bank balance dipped so low she wasn't sure she could cover rent. Nights when her laptop froze and she nearly hurled it across the room. Nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the loan officer had been right, if she was just a girl with too much ambition and not enough resources. But every morning, she rose again. She brewed cheap coffee, tied her hair back, and went to work. Because she knew that every small step forward, every dollar saved, Every line of code written, every sketch refined, was a step away from failure and toward the life she wanted. What kept her going were the glimpses of possibility. The first time her prototype worked, even clumsily, she laughed so hard she cried. The first time a friend tested her idea and said, "Wait, this actually helps," she felt like the world had opened. Those small victories were oxygen, keeping her flame alive. Emily also began networking, sneaking into free business workshops, introducing herself at conferences she could barely afford. She carried homemade business cards, her phone number printed in black ink on cheap cardstock. Some people ignored her, others humored her. But once in a while, someone listened, really listened, and she saw their eyes light up the way hers did. Even then, rejection followed her like a shadow. Investors dismissed her. Mentors told her to lower her sights. Some even laughed outright at her goals. But Emily had already learned that rejection was just redirection. Each no was proof that she was trying, and each setback fueled her resolve. The sacrifices etched themselves into her life like scars. She lived on ramen noodles and dollar store groceries. She stitched holes in her blazer so she could keep wearing it to meetings. She skipped doctor appointments because she couldn't afford the bills. She worked until her wrists ached and her eyes blurred. Yet she refused to quit, because deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and loneliness, was a voice that never wavered. You are building something bigger than yourself. Keep going. One night, after finishing a long shift at the diner, Emily trudged home through the rain. Her shoes were soaked, her bag heavy with notes. She unlocked her apartment door, collapsed onto her chair, and stared at her cluttered desk. For a moment, despair threatened to drown her. But then she whispered to herself, out loud, as if to seal a vow, "This is not sacrifice. This is investment. And one day, it will all pay off." Little did she know, those words would become prophecy. The first headquarters of Emily Carter's company wasn't a glass office tower or even a rented workspace. It was her cramped apartment, where the walls were plastered with sticky notes and sketches, and the air smelled of burnt coffee and determination. She cleared out her tiny living room, pushing her bed into the corner and selling her couch to make space for folding tables she bought secondhand. On those tables sat the beginnings of her dream. Circuit boards, scraps of material, notebooks filled with equations, and a laptop that wheezed every time it booted up. "This," she told herself one night, gazing at the chaos around her, "is the start of something bigger." But she knew she couldn't do it alone. So Emily reached out to a few people she trusted. Friends from college, acquaintances she'd met at workshops, people who, like her, believed in building rather than waiting for permission. There was Jason, a programmer who had once dropped out of graduate school because tuition became unbearable. He had a sharp mind and a sarcastic humor that masked his deep passion for creating. When Emily pitched her idea, his eyes lit up. "It's crazy," he said, "but the best things usually are. Count me in." Then there was Rosa, a graphic designer working a dead-end job at an ad agency. She craved something more meaningful than polishing logos for fast food chains. Emily's vision struck a chord. "If this really helps people the way you say it will," Rosa said, "I want to be part of it." Lastly, Malik, an old friend from her college business classes. He didn't have money to invest, but he had a knack for marketing and a gift for talking to people. "You've got the fire, Em," he told her. "I'll help you make sure the world sees it." The four of them became a team. Not polished, not funded, but united by belief. They met after their day jobs, cramming into Emily's apartment until the early hours of morning. Laptops hummed, pizza boxes stacked up in the corner, and the sound of brainstorming filled the air. At first, progress was slow. The prototype broke more often than it worked. Jason cursed at lines of code that refused to behave. Rosa redesigned the logo a dozen times before Emily finally said, "That's it." That's the one. Malik walked door to door in their neighborhood, pitching the idea to local businesses, often coming back with polite refusals and the occasional slammed door. But every small success felt monumental. The first time the prototype ran without crashing, Emily and Jason high-fived so hard they nearly knocked over the coffee pot. The first time Rosa printed their logo onto a mock-up package, Emily held it in her hands like it was gold. The first time Malik came back with a local cafe owner willing to try their product, they celebrated with cheap champagne, their laughter echoing into the night. Of course, doubts crept in. Their families questioned their choices. Emily's mother called one evening, worry in her voice. "Honey, you're putting everything into this. What if it doesn't work?" Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. "Then at least I'll know I tried. I can't spend my life wondering, what if?" The team worked through nights so long that sunrise became their clock. They fought over decisions, patched together broken prototypes with duct tape, and laughed at their own exhaustion. They learned not just to dream, but to adapt. Money was still painfully scarce. Emily stretched every dollar until it screamed. She negotiated with suppliers, bartered services, and even convinced a local print shop owner to give them a discount by promising future business. "One day," she said with a grin, "we'll be your biggest client." The owner chuckled but agreed. What kept them going wasn't just the idea of success, it was the belief in each other. On nights when Emily doubted herself, Jason reminded her, "You're the reason we're here." Don't forget that when Jason felt like quitting, Rosa showed him the growing list of people waiting to test their product. When Malik grew frustrated, Emily told him, "Every no gets us closer to the yes that matters." Finally, after months of sweat, sacrifice, and sleepless nights, the first version of their product was ready. It wasn't perfect. It was clunky, fragile, and still prone to glitches. But it was real. It was alive. Emily stared at it, sitting on the table, her heart pounding. She thought of the bank officer's dismissive smirk, of the nights eating ramen, of the sacrifices that had brought her here. She smiled through tears. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. The next day, they delivered their prototype to the cafe owner who had agreed to give it a chance. He tested it, skeptical at first. Then his face softened, surprised. This actually works," he said. "It's rough, but it works. You might have something here." The team erupted into cheers. It wasn't a billion-dollar deal. It wasn't fame or fortune, but it was proof. Proof that their dream could step into the world and stand, however shakily, on its own feet. That night, Emily gathered her team in her apartment. She looked at each of them, her eyes fierce and shining. They said no. They laughed. They told us it wasn't possible. But look, we've done it, and this is just the first step. From here, we climb. The others nodded, their exhaustion forgotten in the glow of triumph. The company had no office, no investors, no safety net, but it had something stronger, a foundation built on belief, sacrifice, and the audacity to try. And as Emily lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought filled her mind. We're coming for everything they said we couldn't have. The first prototype had given Emily and her team hope, but hope alone wasn't enough to keep a company alive. In the months that followed, reality crashed into their dream with brutal force. The cafe that had been their first customer initially praised the product, but within weeks, glitches emerged. Software froze during peak hours, frustrating both staff and customers. Jason worked night after night to fix the bugs, but every patch seemed to break something else. One morning, Emily walked into the cafe to find the owner shaking his head, the prototype unplugged and shoved into a corner. "I wanted this to work," he said kindly, "but I can't risk my business on something that keeps failing. Come back when it's stable." The words were polite, but they pierced like knives. Emily carried the unplugged prototype back to her apartment in silence, her team waiting for her with hopeful eyes. She set it down on the table and whispered, "They pulled out." The room fell into stunned quiet. It wasn't just the cafe. Other small businesses they had approached were skeptical. Some tested the product briefly, then backed out after encountering the same glitches. Others never returned calls at all. The few early adopters they managed to convince demanded refunds they couldn't afford to give. Money drained faster than they could refill it. Emily's savings, already thin, evaporated. Jason picked up freelance coding gigs on the side, often too exhausted to focus on their project. Rosa took extra hours at her ad agency, guilt shadowing her every time she missed a meeting. Malik tried everything: cold calls, emails, pitches in coffee shops, but the rejections piled higher than the yeses. The pressure mounted. Rent was overdue. Suppliers demanded payments. Emily juggled bills, sometimes choosing between buying parts for the prototype or groceries for the week. She lived on instant noodles and black coffee, her body weary but her spirit refusing to break. Still, cracks began to show. One night, as they huddled in Emily's apartment over yet another malfunctioning prototype, Jason slammed his laptop shut. "We can't keep doing this, Em. Every time we fix one problem, 3 more pop up. Maybe it's just not meant to work." Emily's chest tightened. "Jason, we're close. I can feel it. We just need more time." "Time?" Jason laughed bitterly. "Time doesn't pay rent. Time doesn't buy parts. I left grad school because I believed in this, but belief doesn't keep the lights on." The words hung heavy in the room. Rosa looked away, blinking back tears. Malik rubbed his temples, silent. Emily swallowed hard, fighting the urge to crumble. "If you want to walk away, I won't stop you. But I can't quit. Not after everything we've given up. Not after everything we've built." Silence stretched. No one left that night, but the doubt lingered like a shadow. Days bled into weeks, each one harder than the last. Emily worked triple shifts, coming home with blistered feet, only to collapse in front of her laptop and push through until sunrise. Her eyes burned, her hands shook, but she kept going. Because the alternative, giving up, was worse than exhaustion. Then came the lowest point. A potential investor, one Emily had spent months courting, finally agreed to meet. She dressed in her patched blazer, rehearsed her pitch, and walked into the downtown office with her heart pounding. The investor listened, expression blank. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Your idea isn't terrible, but you don't look like someone who can build $1 billion company. You look desperate. Investors don't invest in desperation." Emily held her composure until she left the building. Then she ducked into an alleyway, pressed her back against a wall, and let the tears fall. For the first time since starting her journey, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the world was right about her. That night, she walked into her apartment to find her team waiting. The prototype sat dismantled on the table, wires exposed, circuits scattered. They looked at her with weary eyes, and Emily knew they were waiting for her to say the words, "It's over." Instead, she took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and said, "We are at rock bottom, which means the only way left is up." Her voice shook, but her conviction held. She looked at Jason, Rosa, Malik, the people who had sacrificed alongside her. "If you leave, I'll understand. But if you stay, know this. We will rebuild. We will refine. And when the world tells us no, we'll answer with yes. Our yes." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Rosa placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "I'm in. I didn't come this far to stop now." Jason sighed, then reopened his laptop. "Fine. But if I go down, I'm going down coding." Malik chuckled softly. "Guess that makes us stubborn fools together." Emily's chest swelled with gratitude. They were bruised, battered, and broke. But they were still a team. The setbacks had nearly crushed them. But in that moment, something shifted. They realized failure wasn't the end. It was the forge. And out of that forge, they would rise sharper, stronger, unstoppable. The weeks after their string of failures felt like walking through fog, heavy, directionless, suffocating. Emily and her team still gathered in her apartment every night, But the energy was different. The laughter that once filled the room had faded, replaced by the hum of tired machines and the silence of unspoken doubts. Their prototype sat in the corner, battered and taped together from endless repairs. Sometimes Emily caught herself staring at it, wondering if it was mocking her, proof of all their effort and all their shortcomings. Then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Malik had managed to convince a small business association to let Emily present at their monthly meeting. It wasn't glamorous. It was a gathering of local shop owners, accountants, and entrepreneurs in the basement of a community centre. But it was a chance, and Emily refused to waste it. She stood at the front of the room, blazer patched at the elbow, hair pulled back hastily, her binder worn from months of use. Dozens of skeptical faces stared back at her. She could almost hear their thoughts. Another young dreamer with a half-baked idea. Her voice shook at first, but then she remembered every sacrifice, every night of ramen noodles, every rejection, every tear shed in silence. Her voice grew stronger. She spoke not just about her product, but about the problem it solved, about the hours it could save, the money it could protect, the lives it could make easier. When she finished, polite applause rippled through the room. A few people nodded, most returned to their conversations. Emily's heart sank. Another dead end. But then, as she packed up her materials, a man approached. He was in his late 40s, tall, with a kind but shrewd gaze. He extended his hand. Name's Robert Jennings. I run Jennings Supply Chain Solutions. We move goods for over 100 businesses across the state. Emily blinked, shaking his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Jennings. I liked your pitch, he said simply. Rough around the edges, sure, but the heart of it, that's something. You said your product could streamline operations. I want to see if you can prove it. Emily's pulse quickened. You mean you'd be interested in trying it? I mean, Jennings said with a small smile, I'll give you a pilot contract. 30 days. You show me it works, I'll back you. Fail, and we walk away. Deal? Emily's throat tightened. A real contract. A real chance. She nodded, trying not to let her voice shake. Deal. When she returned to her apartment that night, her team was waiting with their usual weary expressions. She slammed the binder onto the table, grinning for the first time in weeks. We got a pilot contract. The room erupted. Jason nearly dropped his laptop. Rosa squealed, covering her mouth in disbelief. Malik threw his arms in the air like they had already won the lottery. The next 30 days became the most intense of their lives. They worked around the clock, refining every glitch, testing every function. Jason barely slept, fueled by coffee and stubborn determination. Rosa redesigned the interface to make it sleek and professional, while Malik crafted a pitch deck that could impress even the harshest critics. Emily was everywhere at once. Coding alongside Jason, reviewing designs with Rosa, rehearsing presentations with Malik. She was exhausted, but the fire in her chest burned brighter than ever. The day of the pilot launch, they delivered their product to Jennings Supply Chain Solutions. The office buzzed with skeptical employees, most of them expecting the system to crash within hours. Emily stood tall, though her stomach churned with nerves. Hours passed. The system held. By the end of the first day, efficiency had improved noticeably. By the end of the first week, employees who had rolled their eyes were now asking when they could get access to more features. At the 30-day review, Robert Jennings leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a slow smile spreading across his face. Miss Carter, you've got something here. It's not perfect, but it's real. And it works. Emily's team held their breath. I want to sign a longer contract, he continued. And I want to introduce you to some of my partners. They need this too. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back, replacing them with the fiercest smile she had ever worn. Thank you, Mr. Jennings. You won't regret it. That night, the team celebrated not with champagne, they couldn't afford it, but with grocery store sodas and dollar pizza. They sat on the floor of Emily's apartment, toasting with mismatched mugs. To survival, Malik said. To proving them wrong, Rosa added. To the first, yes, Jason grinned. And Emily, raising her mug high, declared, to the empire we're going to build. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a promise. The turning point had arrived. Success, when it finally came, did not arrive in a blaze of glory. It came in increments, small contracts, cautious clients, late-night emails that began with, "We're willing to give it a try." Robert Jennings kept his promise. He not only renewed his contract, but also introduced Emily to 3 other business owners in his network. One was skeptical, one was dismissive, but one agreed to pilot the product. When their efficiency improved, word spread. Soon, another company called, then another. Within 6 months, Emily's team had gone from 1 client to 10. It was still a fragile operation. Every bug fix sent Jason into days of sleepless work. Every new design stretched Rosa to her limits. Every sales pitch drained Malik's energy. But the momentum was undeniable. They moved out of Emily's apartment and into a small rented office above a laundromat. The walls were thin, the heating unreliable, and the plumbing occasionally rattled like a dying engine. But to Emily, it was a palace. On the door, she proudly taped a sign. Carter Innovations, Inc. Employees trickled in, first an intern, then a customer service rep, then a junior developer. Each hire felt like a leap of faith, paid for with every dime Emily scraped together. They couldn't offer big salaries, but Emily offered something more valuable: belief. You're not just working for a paycheck, she told every new hire. You're building something that matters. The pressure mounted with every step forward. Bills grew. Demands multiplied. Mistakes still happened. One memorable night, a critical system crashed at 2 a.m. for a major client. Jason called Emily in a panic. Instead of berating him, she grabbed her coat, rushed to the office, and worked beside him until dawn. They fixed it minutes before the client's business opened. "Emily," Jason muttered afterward, rubbing his eyes, "you're insane." She grinned, exhausted but defiant. Insane is how empires are built. Word of mouth remained their lifeline. They couldn't afford glossy ads or polished marketing campaigns. Instead, Malik leveraged every relationship he had, networking relentlessly at community events, trade shows, even coffee shop meetups. His pitch was simple but powerful. We're small, but we care. We'll fight harder for you than anyone else will. Clients began to notice. They weren't dealing with a faceless corporation. They were dealing with Emily herself, a founder who answered calls at midnight, a CEO who personally visited sites to ensure things worked. That dedication, that grit, became their brand. And yet, the financial world still dismissed her. Banks continued to reject her applications for loans. Venture capital firms, now aware of her growing company, offered insulting terms, tiny investments in exchange for controlling stakes. "It's cute what you've built," one investor sneered during a meeting, "but without real money, you'll never scale." Emily walked out of the meeting without a second thought. She would rather scrape by with dignity than sell her vision to people who didn't believe in it. The dismissals only fueled her determination. "They think we can't scale," she told her team one night, her eyes blazing. "Watch us." So they scaled, without the bankers, without the investors. They reinvested every cent of profit back into the company. Emily lived on the bare minimum, her apartment furnished with nothing but a mattress on the floor and a folding table for meals. Rosa freelanced on the side to bring in extra money. Jason pawned his old gaming console to buy software upgrades. Malik slept in the office more often than not. It was brutal. But it was working. By the second year, Carter Innovations had contracts in 3 states. By the third, they had expanded to 5. Their reputation grew, a scrappy underdog company that delivered results bigger firms couldn't. Clients loved them not for polish, but for their relentless reliability. Articles began to appear in local business journals. The startup that refused to quit. One headline even read, "Rejected by banks, Emily Carter builds her own ladder." When Emily read that article, she smiled. The bank rejection still stung, but now it felt like fuel. She clipped the article and taped it inside her office door. Every time she walked in, she was reminded, "They said no. I said yes." Of course, growth brought new challenges. The bigger they got, the harder the problems became. Competitors noticed. Larger corporations tried to undercut them. Rumors swirled that her company was too small to handle national contracts. But Emily stood firm. She personally led pitches to bigger clients, walking into gleaming skyscrapers with the same patched blazer she had worn since her first presentation. Her confidence turned heads. Her story, rejected, underestimated but unrelenting, resonated. Some clients still said no, but more and more began to say yes. By year 4, Carter Innovations was no longer just a scrappy startup. It was a rising force. Revenues climbed into the millions. The office above the laundromat was replaced by a sleek, if modest, downtown space. Employees now numbered in the dozens, and still, Emily carried herself like the girl who had once sat in that bank, binder in hand, being told she wasn't enough. Because she knew the truth, they were wrong. Her company was living proof. Growth against all odds. By the 5th year, Emily Carter could no longer walk into a conference unnoticed. Her once quiet company had grown into a regional force, and word of her improbable rise spread faster than she could keep up with. It started small, local newspapers running human interest stories about a young woman who built a tech company from nothing. Then business journals picked it up. Then national media. Reporters were fascinated not only by her product, but by her journey. The rejections, the sacrifices, the fact that she had built everything without loans, without investors, without privilege. She was proof that grit could still carve a path in an unforgiving world. Soon, her inbox overflowed with interview requests. Emily had never craved the spotlight, but she understood its power. If her story could inspire others, especially women and young entrepreneurs who had been told they weren't enough, then it was worth sharing. On her first television appearance, the host introduced her with a flourish. From rejection to revolution, meet the woman who built $1 million company out of her living room. Emily sat under the studio lights, heart pounding. But when the questions came, she answered with the same honesty that had fueled her journey. "How did you survive being turned down by every bank?" She smiled faintly. "They didn't give me money, so I gave myself permission. I invested everything I had, my time, my energy, my belief. And sometimes belief is worth more than dollars." Audiences loved her. Clips of her interviews went viral, shared with captions like, "The face of resilience," and "Proof that no means nothing." Business magazines put her on their covers. One headline read, "The self-made woman shaking up the industry." Another, "Rejected by banks, now worth millions." But beyond the headlines, recognition came in quieter, deeper ways. At conferences, young women lined up after her talks, clutching notebooks and wide-eyed with hope. "I want to start something, but they say I'm too young," one whispered. Emily leaned close and said, "So was I. Start anyway." Another admitted, "My family thinks business isn't for women." Emily smiled gently. "Then prove them wrong. Your dream belongs to you, not them." She received letters from single mothers, from immigrants, from small-town dreamers. They thanked her for being visible, for showing that success was possible without the usual advantages. One note simply read, "You don't know me, but because of you, I didn't quit." Emily taped that note to her office wall. On days when exhaustion pressed down, she looked at it and reminded herself, "This is bigger than me." Of course, recognition brought challenges too. Critics emerged, accusing her of exaggerating her struggles. "No one builds a company alone," one article sneered. Emily didn't argue. She had never claimed she was alone. Her team had been with her from the start. She used the criticism as another reminder. Every step forward would always attract doubters. And that was fine, because for every critic, there were 10 more voices cheering her on. Her team felt the change too. Rosa's designs were now praised in industry blogs. Jason, once a burned-out coder, was invited to lecture at universities about building scalable systems. Malik became a sought-after speaker on grassroots marketing. The recognition wasn't just Emily's, it was theirs, together. The most surreal moment came when Emily was invited back to her alma mater to give a commencement speech. Standing at the podium, looking out over rows of graduates in caps and gowns, she felt the weight of her own journey. "When I sat where you are," she told them, "I had nothing but a dream and a binder full of notes." People laughed. Banks slammed doors. I lived on ramen noodles and hope. But here's the truth. Rejection isn't the end. It's the beginning. Every no brings you closer to the yes that matters. And sometimes the yes you need is the one you give yourself. The auditorium erupted in applause. Recognition didn't change Emily's habits. She still woke early, still wore the same patched blazer to remind herself of where she came from, still carried her worn notebook filled with scribbles. Fame wasn't her fuel. Impact was. But there was no denying it. She had become a symbol, a living, breathing answer to everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. The self-made woman, the underdog who refused to bow, the entrepreneur who built an empire from rejection. And while Emily remained humble, she also knew this. Recognition wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the middle, because her company was no longer just a promising startup. It was on the cusp of something bigger, something monumental. The billion-dollar horizon was coming into view. The news came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Emily was in the middle of reviewing product reports when her phone buzzed with a flood of notifications. At first, she ignored them. Numbers came before news. But when Malik burst into her office, waving his phone, she knew something had shifted. "Emily," he said, his grin wide. "It's official. We've crossed the line." She frowned, confused. "What line?" "The line," Malik laughed, nearly breathless. "The valuation." The analysts confirmed it this morning. Carter Innovations is officially worth over $1 billion. For a moment, the words didn't register. Billion. It didn't sound real. Not after the ramen dinners, the leaky apartment, the countless rejections. Not after being told she didn't look like someone who could build a billion-dollar company. But the truth was undeniable. Her company, born in a cramped living room, built with scraps and sweat, was now a unicorn. The news spread like wildfire. Business networks ran headlines. From bank rejection to billion-dollar empire. Emily Carter joins the Self-Made Billionaires Club. Proof that grit still wins. Her employees filled the office with cheers, some hugging, some crying. Jason leaned back in his chair, muttering, "Guess selling my gaming console was worth it." Rosa stood in the corner with tears streaming down her face, whispering, "We did it." Malik, ever the showman, popped open a cheap bottle of champagne, spraying foam across the room. Emily, however, sat quietly at her desk, letting the noise wash over her. She wasn't numb. She was overwhelmed. Her mind drifted back to the bank officer's smirk, the dismissive tone of investors, the exhaustion of nights she thought she couldn't go on. She thought of her mother's whispered encouragement, her father's grease-stained hands, her team's stubborn loyalty, and she smiled. Not with arrogance, but with gratitude. That evening, she walked through the company's new headquarters, a sleek, glass-fronted building downtown. Employees filled the open floors, typing, designing, building the future they had all dreamed of. Emily moved quietly among them, greeting each by name. They were the reason the company was alive, the reason the valuation mattered. At the top floor, she stood before the window, looking out at the city skyline. A city that had once ignored her, now flashing her name in neon on the scrolling tickers of financial news channels. Her assistant entered softly. "Emily, Forbes wants to schedule a cover shoot. CNBC is requesting an exclusive interview. And the White House has invited you to speak at the Entrepreneurs Forum." Emily nodded absently. She would do those things. They mattered. But at her core, she wasn't chasing the cameras. She was still the woman with the patched blazer and the binder of notes. The one who believed that no rejection could define her. Later that week, she called an all-hands meeting. Hundreds of employees gathered in the atrium, murmuring with anticipation. Emily stepped onto the stage, her voice steady. 5 years ago, this company was just an idea in a small apartment. No money, no investors, just belief. We were told it couldn't be done, that it was impossible, that we weren't enough. Today, the world calls us a billion-dollar company. But hear me clearly, that number doesn't define us. What defines us is the work, the impact, the lives we touch. The room thundered with applause. Emily raised her hand, silencing the noise. Don't ever forget where we came from. And don't ever forget the people who will come after us, dreaming in small apartments, hearing the same no's we heard. Our job now is to prove to them that their yes is waiting. Her employees rose to their feet, the ovation echoing like the roar of destiny. That night, when the cameras were gone and the office lights dimmed, Emily returned home. Despite her billions, she still lived simply. Her apartment was nicer now, yes, but not extravagant. In the corner of her study sat the same binder she had carried into the bank all those years ago. Its pages were worn, its ink faded, but to Emily, it was priceless. She opened it, tracing her fingers over the scribbles, the projections, the notes filled with hope and desperation. And she whispered, "We did it." But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of the journey. Billion was just a number. The real legacy was the story, the proof that no rejection, no dismissal, no locked door could stop someone who refused to give up. Emily Carter, once invisible, now stood as a beacon, not just of success, but of resilience. And she wasn't finished yet. The glass doors of the downtown bank gleamed just as brightly as they had years ago. The marble floors still shone under the fluorescent lights. The leather chairs still exuded wealth and polish. Nothing had changed about the building, but everything had changed about Emily Carter. She walked through the lobby, flanked by two of her executives, her heels clicking against the tile with quiet authority. People turned to look, some whispering, some recognizing her face from magazine covers. She wore a tailored suit now, sharp and commanding, but her eyes still carried the fire of the young woman who had once walked in here with nothing but a binder and a dream. The receptionist, wide-eyed, greeted her with nervous politeness. "Good morning, Miss Carter. They're expecting you upstairs." Emily smiled faintly. "Thank you." In the elevator, she exhaled slowly. Memories flooded back. The dismissive smile of the loan officer, the sting of being told she needed a man beside her to be credible, the humiliation of walking out rejected. That pain had never fully left her. But today, she wasn't here for revenge. She was here for closure. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor. A long mahogany table stretched across the boardroom, where the bank's directors sat in their tailored suits, their expressions carefully measured. At the head of the table was a familiar face, Richard H. Calloway, the same loan officer who had once dismissed her. His hair was grayer now, but his smirk was unchanged. "Ms. Carter," he said, rising stiffly, "thank you for coming. Please sit." Emily took her seat, her back straight, her gaze steady. Around her, the executives shifted uncomfortably. They all knew who she was now, the woman who had built a billion-dollar empire without a cent from them. The chair of the board cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss a potential partnership. Carter Innovations has become a major player, and we believe there's an opportunity for our bank to support your continued expansion." Emily listened quietly. They spoke of credit lines, international scaling, and strategic partnerships. Their voices droned with the same confidence they had once used to dismiss her. When they finished, Emily folded her hands on the table. "It's funny," she said softly, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Years ago, I sat in this very building. I asked for $150,000, a fraction of what we earn in a single day now. I was told I wasn't credible, that I needed a man to stand beside me to be taken seriously." A flush crept across Calloway's face, but he said nothing. Emily's gaze swept the room. "That rejection nearly broke me, but it also built me, because when you said no, I said yes to myself, and that yes carried me here." The room was silent. No one dared interrupt. She leaned forward slightly. "Now you want a partnership. Now you want to attach your name to mine. But understand this. I don't need you. You need me." The weight of her words sank deep. Some executives shifted in discomfort. Others lowered their eyes. Finally, she smiled. Not with malice, but with finality. "Here's what I'll offer. You don't get to own me. You don't get to dictate my terms. What you can have is the privilege of managing a portion of our community reinvestment fund. The money will go towards small businesses, people like me, years ago, who just need someone to believe in them, and you will lend it on fair terms. No condescension, no dismissals. If you can agree to that, we have a deal. If not, I'll take my billions elsewhere." The silence was electric. Calloway's jaw tightened. The board chair cleared his throat again, visibly rattled. "Ms. Carter, we can accept those terms." Emily rose, gathering her papers. "Good. Then let's call it what it is. Not a favor from you, but redemption, for every dreamer you once turned away." She left the boardroom with her head high, her heels striking like a drumbeat of victory. The very walls that had once swallowed her humiliation now echoed with her triumph. Outside, as she stepped into the sunlight, Malik was waiting with a grin. "So? How'd it go?" Emily breathed in the city air, her heart light. "We didn't just win, Malik. We changed the game, and we made sure no one else has to hear what I heard that day." He laughed. "From bank rejection to bank reform. That's one hell of a circle." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with both pride and humility. "It's not just my circle. It's every woman's, every entrepreneur's, every person who was told no when they deserved yes." She looked up at the towering bank behind her, then turned away, walking toward the future she had built with her own two hands. The redemption was complete.